I never believed in ghosts. In all my years of serving in the military, I had seen enough horrors of this world to know that the supernatural wasn't real. Men do terrible things, and there's always a reason behind it. But that was before. That was before our unit disappeared. We were a small group of recon specialists, sent deep into the forests of eastern Ukraine. The dense, forgotten woods were a perfect hiding place for enemy forces. Our mission was simple: gather intelligence, report back. Just observe, record, and return. There were 5 of us. Commander Andrei was a hard man, a veteran of countless battles. He didn't speak much unless it was to give orders. Then there was Victor, my best friend since basic training, and the joker of the group. Yuri was the youngest, barely 20, and this was his first real mission. Finally, there was Pavlo, a quiet man, the kind who never seemed bothered by anything. He was reliable, though, and in our line of work, that was all that mattered. We'd been walking through the woods for 2 days when we came across the village, or what was left of it. The houses were long abandoned, crumbling ruins covered in moss and vines. There was something about it that made my skin crawl. The air felt thick, like the forest itself was watching us. Andrei ordered us to set up camp nearby, but none of us wanted to get too close to that place. The first night passed uneventfully. We took turns on watch, listening to the sounds of the forest. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves put us on edge, but that was normal in enemy territory. The real trouble started on the second night. It was my turn to take the midnight watch. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their shadows twisting and shifting in the dim light. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, but definitely human. "Come closer," it said. I stood up, heart racing, and scanned the perimeter. There was no one there. The others were asleep, and the whisper had come from deeper in the woods. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Help me." I wasn't sure why I did it, but I grabbed my rifle and stepped into the forest, leaving the camp behind. The whisper led me deeper and deeper, until the firelight was a distant glow behind me. The trees closed in and the air grew colder. My breath came out in white puffs, even though it was summer. I stopped when I saw her. A woman stood in the clearing, dressed in tattered rags, her hair hanging in matted clumps around her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they were empty, black soulless voids. She raised a hand, beckoning me closer. "Help me." I took a step back, every instinct screaming at me to run. But my legs wouldn't move. It was like something was holding me in place, forcing me to stay. Suddenly, I heard a shout behind me. Victor had followed me into the woods. "What the hell are you doing, man?" he yelled, grabbing my arm and dragging me back toward the camp. I glanced back over my shoulder, but the woman was gone. The clearing was empty, like she had never been there. Back at camp, I tried to explain what I had seen, but no one believed me. Not even Victor, who had seen the fear in my eyes. "It was just a dream," he said. The next morning, Andrei decided we would move out. The village was making everyone uneasy, and we hadn't seen any signs of enemy activity. But something was wrong. The forest felt different. The trees seemed closer, the shadows darker, and the whispers, they hadn't stopped. Yuri was the first to disappear. We had been walking for hours when we realized he was gone. 1 minute he was right behind us, and the next he had vanished without a sound. We called out his name, fanned out to search the area, but there was no trace of him, not even footprints. Pavlo suggested that Yuri had wandered off, maybe got spooked and ran. But I knew better. Something had taken him. I could feel it in my bones. That night we set up camp again, but no one slept. The fire flickered weakly, and the forest around us was unnervingly silent. No animals, no wind, nothing. It was like the world had stopped. I took the first watch again, my eyes scanning the darkness, my finger resting on the trigger. Victor sat next to me, his usual grin replaced by a grim frown. It was around midnight when I saw her again. The woman from the clearing. She stood just beyond the firelight, her hollow eyes fixed on me. This time she didn't whisper. She just pointed into the woods, her bony finger trembling slightly. "Don't look," I said to Victor. He had already seen her. "What the fuck?" he breathed, standing up. Before I could stop him, he was walking toward her. As if in a trance, I took his hand, pulling him back, but his eyes were glazed over. And then he was gone. I don't know how to explain it. 1 second, I was holding him, and the next, he vanished into thin air, like he had never been there. I shouted his name, but the forest swallowed my voice. The others woke up, and I told them what had happened. Andrei didn't say a word. He just packed up his gear and ordered us to move. Pavlo and I followed, but I could feel it. The forest was alive and it wanted us. By dawn, we were the only two left. By dawn, it was just Pavlo and me. The forest, once hauntingly beautiful, now felt like a suffocating prison. No matter which way we went, it felt as though the trees closed in, the path looping back on itself. I'd heard of people going mad in forests, losing their sense of direction, but this was different. The whispers were louder now, not just from the shadows but from within our minds. We were being hunted, not by men but by something far older. Pavlo and I didn't talk much as we moved. What was there to say? I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I felt gnawing at my gut. We both knew something had taken Yuri and Victor, and neither of us wanted to be next. The trees grew denser as we pushed deeper into the forest. The daylight barely filtered through the canopy, casting everything in a sickly green hue. The ground was soft underfoot, like walking on a bed of decay. Pavlo stopped suddenly, looking around with wide eyes. "Do you hear it?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't want to admit it, but I heard it too. Faint voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, luring, tempting. "Don't listen," I muttered. "Keep moving." We stumbled upon an old cemetery, hidden deep within the woods. The gravestones were ancient, crumbling relics, some half sunken into the earth. The names were long faded, but the unease they brought was fresh. This place felt wrong, like we were trespassing on sacred ground. "There's something here," Pavlo said, staring at one of the gravestones. I knelt down beside him, brushing away the dirt from the stone. The name had been erased by time, but there was a symbol I recognized, an old Orthodox cross. This place had been abandoned for centuries, but it felt alive. That's when I heard it. Not a whisper this time, but a groan, low and guttural, came from beneath us. The earth shifted slightly, like something was moving below. Pavlo stood frozen, his eyes locked on the ground. "We need to leave," but he didn't move. His eyes had gone glassy, just like Victor's had before he disappeared. "Pavlo!" I shook him hard, but it was too late. He let out a strangled gasp and collapsed onto the ground, his body rigid as if gripped by some unseen force. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't. Something was wrong with this place, something ancient and malevolent. I stood there, staring, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. His eyes opened again, but they weren't his. They were black, soulless voids, just like the woman's. He stood up slowly, his movements jerky, unnatural. His lips twisted into a grotesque smile. "Stay with us?" A voice rasped from his throat, though it wasn't Pavlo speaking. "Stay forever." I backed away, tripping over a root as the thing that had once been Pavlo stepped toward me. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of his hollow laughter echoing through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, but no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The forest seemed to warp around me, the trees shifting, twisting, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Every direction looked the same, and I no longer knew if I was moving deeper into the woods or circling back on myself. The whispers were constant now, growing louder with every step. They weren't in my head anymore. They were all around me, voices overlapping, some pleading, others laughing, and some just repeating my name over and over. As the sky began to darken, I found myself at the edge of another clearing. This one wasn't like the others, it was wrong. In the center stood a massive oak tree, ancient and gnarled, its roots spreading out like veins through the earth. Hanging from its branches were ropes, old, frayed nooses swaying gently in the wind, though there was no breeze. I wanted to turn back, but my body moved forward on its own, like I was being pulled by some invisible force. My feet dragged me toward the tree, closer and closer to the hanging ropes. I could see the ground beneath the tree was disturbed, as though something had been buried there, and recently. I stopped just short of the tree, staring up at the ropes. That's when I saw them. Faces. Pale, gaunt faces staring down at me from the shadows of the branches. They were watching, their hollow eyes gleaming with hunger. I couldn't move. The whispers turned to laughter, cruel and mocking. "Join us?" they said in unison, their voices like nails scraping against my skull. A chill ran down my spine, and I realized with growing terror that I wasn't alone. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest. It was Andrei, or at least it looked like him. His face was pale, his uniform tattered and stained with dirt and something darker. His eyes, they were gone, just empty sockets staring back at me. "You shouldn't have come," he said in a voice that wasn't his. "This place, it doesn't let you leave." He raised his hand, and I saw that it was withered, skeletal. He took a step closer, and the ground beneath him seemed to pulse, as though the earth itself was alive. I stumbled back, tripping over one of the roots. My head hit the ground, and everything went black. When I woke, the sun was rising, casting long shadows through the trees. I was alone. There was no sign of Andrei, no sign of Pavlo, Victor, or Yuri. It was as if they had never been there. But I knew better. The whispers were gone, but the silence that replaced them was worse. The forest was watching me, waiting. I stood up, my body aching, and began walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. As I walked, I saw something glinting in the dirt. A dog tag. I bent down and picked it up, my heart sinking as I read the name. It was my name. I realized that I had to get out of the forest. The sun rose higher, but it brought no warmth, no sense of hope. My mind was numb, my body running on instinct alone. Every step I took seemed to pull me deeper into the heart of the forest, but I had to keep moving. I had to survive. Something inside me refused to let go, despite the terror that clung to my thoughts. The forest floor felt cursed, alive with shadows that would swallow me whole if I rested for too long. I needed a vantage point, somewhere safe, somewhere above the whispers and the crawling fear. That's when I saw it. A tall, sturdy tree with thick branches, high enough to give me some distance from whatever lurked below. Its bark was rough and twisted, but there was something oddly comforting about its height. I climbed without hesitation, my muscles burning from the effort. Each branch creaked under my weight, but it held firm, and soon I was high above the ground, nestled between two thick limbs. Up here, the world felt quieter. The canopy blocked most of the sky, but through gaps in the leaves, I could see the stars twinkling faintly. I had never been much of a believer in fate or faith, but those stars gave me something to focus on, something other than the horrors I'd seen. I wrapped my arms around the trunk, securing myself as best I could. Exhaustion hit me like a wave, and despite the fear still lingering in my mind, my body demanded rest. Sleep came quickly, dragging me under into a deep, dreamless slumber. I woke to the sound of birdsong. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was still in the nightmare of the forest, or if I had somehow escaped. But the rough bark beneath my hands and the heavy dampness of the air told me the truth. I was still trapped, but something was different. The air felt lighter, cleaner. The whispers were gone, replaced by the ordinary sounds of nature. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant call of something wild but natural. I sat up carefully, stretching my stiff limbs and looking around. The forest below still felt dark, still felt wrong, but it no longer seemed to be watching me. I climbed down slowly, my feet touching the ground with reluctance. Every step felt like a test. Would the forest turn on me again? Would the voices return? But for the moment, the woods seemed almost peaceful. I kept walking, but this time with purpose. The sun was visible through the trees, and I used it to orient myself. I had no map, no compass, but if I kept the rising sun at my back, I knew I was heading west. Somewhere beyond this cursed place, there had to be an end. There had to be a way out. For the next 2 days, I followed the sun. I rationed the small bit of food I had left and found water in streams that snaked through the underbrush. At night, I climbed back into the trees, resting as best I could between the thick branches. Each morning, I woke to the same strange calm. On the third day, I saw something that made my heart skip. A trail. It was faint, barely more than a narrow gap between the trees, but it was man-made. Broken branches, disturbed earth. Signs that someone or something had passed through recently. I hesitated, unsure if I should follow it, but the desperation to escape outweighed my fear. The trail wound through the forest, leading me deeper into unfamiliar territory. But then, something caught my eye, an old rusted sign half buried in the undergrowth. I wiped away the dirt and squinted at the faded letters. It was a border marker, written in Ukrainian and Russian, warning travelers of military operations in the area. This place had been sealed off, forgotten by the outside world, but it meant one thing. I was close to the edge. Hope surged through me and I quickened my pace. The trees began to thin, the air growing warmer and less oppressive. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see open sky ahead. I don't know how long I had been walking when the trees finally broke. I stumbled out of the woods and onto a dirt road, blinking in the bright sunlight. Felt surreal, too easy after everything I had endured. The road stretched out in both directions, winding through the landscape, but there was no sign of life. No people, no cars, just the road and the endless sky. I stood there, breathing deeply, my heart pounding in my chest. I was out. I had made it, but the forest still lingered in my mind. The whispers, the faces, the feeling of being hunted. It was all too vivid to forget. I glanced back at the tree line, half expecting to see the shadows moving, the figures of my lost comrades emerging from the gloom. But there was nothing, just the silent, towering trees, standing sentinel over the darkness they concealed. I turned away and began walking down the road. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. I had survived. I was alive. And that was enough. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape, I realized that the forest hadn't taken me like it had taken the others. Somehow, through sheer luck or stubbornness, I had escaped its grasp. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. The forest had let me go, but it hadn't forgotten me. I walked down the dirt road, every step putting more distance between me and that cursed forest. The weight of it, the whispers, the faces, still clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Each gust of wind or rustle of leaves made my heart race, reminding me of the voices that once surrounded me. By nightfall, I found an old, dilapidated house on the edge of a field. It had clearly been abandoned for years, but it offered shelter. I made a small fire with what little dry wood I could find and sat there, staring into the flames, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The faces of my comrades, their final moments, haunted me. They were gone, swallowed by a place that defied reason. But why had I survived? I wasn't sure how long I sat by the fire, but at some point, I fell asleep. My body was still exhausted, and though the memories of the forest clung to me, the warmth of the fire lulled me into a fitful rest. I awoke in a cold sweat, jolted from a dream I couldn't fully remember. There had been voices, the same whispers from the forest, but now they were distant, as if calling to me from far away. The fire had long since gone out, leaving only embers glowing in the pre-dawn light. As I stood up and stretched, the feeling of unease washed over me again. The dirt road stretched ahead, and beyond that somewhere was civilization. But I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't truly free. The forest might have let me leave, but I still felt its presence in the back of my mind, like it was waiting. I set off again, moving cautiously. The road began to wind through rolling hills, and in the distance, I saw the first signs of human life. A village, small and quiet, nestled between the hills. Relief flooded through me. Maybe I could find help there, some way to contact the military, to tell someone what had happened to my unit. As I approached the village, I noticed how still it was. No children playing, no sounds of animals, not even smoke rising from the chimneys. The place looked frozen in time. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as I walked down the main street, past old houses with their windows shuttered tight. I knocked on the first door, then the next. No answer. I called out, my voice breaking the eerie silence. Hello? Is anyone here? Nothing. I was about to turn away when I saw a figure moving near the edge of the village, by an old well. It was an elderly man, hunched over and dressed in tattered clothes. He didn't seem surprised to see me, as if he had been expecting my arrival. Are you lost, soldier? He asked, his voice raspy and tired. His eyes were sharp, though, and they seemed to see right through me. I need help, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. My unit, they're gone. I need to get back to the base, or at least find a phone to call someone. The old man shook his head slowly. There's no help here. Not anymore. What do you mean? I asked, my stomach tightening. What happened to this place? The forest happened, he said, his eyes darkening. It's been cursed for as long as anyone can remember. No one who goes in ever comes out the same, if they come out at all. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I got out, I said quietly. I'm still here. The old man studied me for a long moment, then nodded toward the forest in the distance, barely visible from the edge of the village. You may have left the trees behind, but the forest isn't done with you. It never is. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. What do you mean? I'm free. I survived. He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. Survived, yes. But free? No, boy. You'll never be free. Not as long as the forest remembers your name. I left the village in a haze, the old man's words echoing in my mind. The forest remembers your name. Was that what I felt? That constant presence in the back of my mind, the feeling that I was being watched? Even now, far from the trees, I felt tethered to it, like an invisible thread tied me to the heart of that dark, cursed place. By afternoon, I found another road, more traveled, and soon after that, a truck came rumbling by. The driver was a kind man, a farmer from a nearby village. He simply let me climb into the passenger seat and offered me water and bread. "Where are you headed, son?" he asked after a few miles of silence. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Back to the military base," I said, although part of me wasn't sure if that was true. Could I even explain what had happened? Would anyone believe me? Or would I be just another ghost story, like the ones whispered about in old villages? The man nodded. "You're not the first to come out of that forest, you know. There's something wrong with it. No one talks about it much anymore, but my grandfather used to say there were things in those woods. Things older than any of us." I swallowed hard. "Do people make it out?" "Some do," the farmer said, glancing at me from the corner of his eye. "But they're never the same, and sometimes after a while they just disappear, like the forest calls them back." I didn't answer. I just stared out the window as the landscape rolled by, feeling the tightening grip of fear around my chest again. That night, I found myself alone in a small town. I managed to get a room at an inn, the soft bed feeling strange after days of sleeping in trees and on dirt. But despite the comfort, I couldn't sleep. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the soft creak of the wooden floor and the occasional murmur from the street outside. I kept seeing faces in the darkness, hearing whispers at the edge of sleep. My body felt heavy, drained, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them: Victor, Yuri, Pavlo, and Andrei, standing at the edge of the trees, his eyes hollow and empty. When dawn came, I knew what I had to do. The old man was right. The forest wasn't done with me, and if I wanted to survive, truly survive, I had to face it again. I returned to the edge of the forest the next day. The trees loomed ahead, tall and silent, their shadows long under the morning light. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do, but I couldn't live with the weight of the whispers, with the constant pull at my mind. The forest had to let me go, truly this time. The path I had walked days before seemed to beckon me. My heart pounded, but I stepped forward. The air grew colder as I entered the woods again, but the whispers didn't start right away. I could feel the presence though, watching, waiting. Deeper I went, back to the places I had seen, the places where my comrades had vanished. The silence grew heavier, more oppressive, and I could sense the forest wrapping around me like a living thing. The clearing where I'd seen the woman, the cemetery, even the place where I'd last seen Andrei. It all felt wrong, as though I were walking through the ghost of a memory. I stopped in the center of the clearing, the same spot where I had first heard the whispers, and waited. My breath was shallow, my fingers trembling as I gripped my rifle, even though I knew it wouldn't help. And then I heard it. The voice. It was Victor's voice, calling my name from deep within the trees. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the sound. This time I wouldn't run. This time, I was ready to face whatever waited for me in the dark. I followed Victor's voice through the thick undergrowth, my heart pounding with every step. It was unmistakable, the way he called my name, like he had just fallen behind during one of our marches, his usual cocky tone still there. Something was using his voice to pull me deeper into the forest, to draw me back to the place where my mind had nearly broken. The trees grew closer, darker, as I pressed on. My footsteps barely made a sound now, as if the earth itself absorbed them, not wanting to break the silence that had descended like a heavy fog. The whispers returned, not in fragments, but in full voices. I heard Pavlo, Yuri, Andrei, each of them calling my name in different directions, pulling at me from all sides. They were everywhere and nowhere. "Come back," Victor's voice said, closer now. "We're waiting for you. You don't have to do this alone." I stopped in a small clearing. It was the same one where I had first seen the woman with the empty eyes, but now the air was colder, heavier. I could almost see my breath, though it was the middle of summer. The wind picked up, swirling the leaves around me, and suddenly the forest was alive with motion. Shadows flickered between the trees, and the whispers intensified. They were calling me, pleading, angry, desperate. The faces of my comrades flashed in the darkness, one after another, twisted in expressions of terror and pain. Victor, Pavlo, Yuri, Andrei. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the voices grew louder, more insistent. "You can't leave," they whispered. "We can't leave. Stay with us." "No," I muttered, my voice shaking. "This isn't real. You're not real. Don't leave us." Yuri's voice screamed, and I felt something cold wrap around my wrist, tugging at me. I looked down, and there, half buried in the earth, was a pale hand. Yuri's hand, clutching at me with a death grip. I yanked my arm away, stumbling backward, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse, like something alive was waiting just beneath the surface. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the spot as more hands emerged from the soil, reaching for me. They weren't just my comrades, they were older, gaunt, withered hands. I was surrounded. "No!" I shouted, swinging my rifle in front of me, though I knew it was useless. "You're not taking me." The forest went silent for a moment, and the hands froze in place, their bony fingers inches from my legs. Then, a voice broke through the silence. Not a whisper, but a low, deep sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. "You cannot escape what has already claimed you." It wasn't Victor, Pavlo, Yuri, or Andrei. It wasn't a voice I recognized at all. It was something older, something ancient. The forest itself speaking to me, its will bending the world around me. I stumbled back again, breathing hard, feeling the cold sweat running down my spine. My mind was racing, desperate to find a way out. My only thought was survival. But how? How could I survive a place that didn't want to let me go? The whispers began again, softer this time, as though whatever was controlling them had lost interest in pretending. The shadows moved closer, and I could feel the weight of countless eyes on me. The forest had me surrounded, its grip tightening like a noose. "You have a choice," the deep voice said again, vibrating through the air. "Stay and be part of the forest, as all the others have, or face the unknown. You cannot leave unchanged." The ground beneath me shuddered, and I saw cracks forming in the earth, black and endless, like the forest was opening up to swallow me whole. The trees loomed overhead, bending unnaturally, their branches curling inward like fingers reaching out to claim me. I could feel it, the pull. The same pull that had taken Victor, Pavlo, Yuri, and Andrei. It was stronger now, almost impossible to resist. But I wasn't like them. I had made it out before. I had survived. And that gave me hope, however small. The forest whispered, tempting me with promises of release, of peace. If I just gave in, I wouldn't have to fight anymore. I wouldn't have to run. I wouldn't have to feel the fear gnawing at my soul. But something deep inside me, something primal, refused to submit. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to let the forest win. Not without a fight. I closed my eyes, blocking out the voices, the shadows, the hands reaching for me. I forced myself to remember who I was, what I had been through, the sound of gunfire. I wasn't just some lost soul. I was a soldier. I opened my eyes and took a step back, then another, until I was standing at the edge of the clearing. The voices screamed in protest, but I ignored them. I could feel the ground trembling beneath me, as if the forest was trying to shake me loose, to drag me back. But I kept moving. The deeper I went into the forest, the stronger the pull became. I could feel it behind me, the weight of the shadows pressing in, but I kept my focus on the path ahead. I wasn't sure if it was real anymore, if any of it was real, but I knew I had to get out. I wasn't running now. I was walking with purpose, my breath steady, my mind clear. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat, strong and steady in my ears. The air grew warmer, the trees less dense. I could see the faint glow of sunlight through the branches ahead. The forest was still there, watching, waiting, but I was stronger than it now. After what felt like hours, I broke through the tree line. I stumbled out onto a dirt road, gasping for breath, the weight of the forest lifting from my shoulders like a heavy burden I had been carrying for years. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape, but these shadows were different, natural, comforting. I looked back at the forest, its trees dark and silent in the fading light. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. It was Andrei, or at least it looked like him. His empty eyes stared at me, unblinking, but there was no malice there, just acceptance. He raised his hand, as if in a final salute, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there, staring at the place where he had been, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. The forest had let me go. I didn't know why or how, but I had survived. I turned away from the woods and began walking down the road. The night was coming, but I no longer feared the dark. I had faced it and lived to tell the tale.